Breaking tonight, Canada's defense sovereignty just reached a critical crossroads. Trump threatened, the NDP pushed back, and suddenly an aircraft contract became a question of national independence. Tensions are escalating between Ottawa and Washington right now. The new Democratic Party called for canceling Canada's F-35 fighter jet contract, but instead of diplomatic concerns about offending America, they're citing Mark Carney's vision for middle power autonomy. And Trump, he responded exactly how you'd expect, with threats, tariffs, and territorial intimidation. Everyone believed Canada's F-35 purchase was inevitable. Defense analysts assumed military integration with the United States was non-negotiable. Political observers expected Ottawa to ignore any alternatives regardless of American behavior. They were all utterly incorrect. Ottawa, Wednesday this week. Standing before Parliament, interim NDP leader Don Davies made a statement that challenged Canada's entire defense procurement strategy. The bottom line is that purchasing F-35s from the United States will deepen our military integration with a superpower, not reduce it. He wasn't talking about aircraft specifications. He was talking about sovereignty. Translation: the NDP just told Washington that Canadian independence is more important than American approval. And what happened next? The party that listened to Carney's middle powers doctrine reveals exactly why this F-35 debate is reshaping Canada's strategic autonomy while American leverage tactics backfire. Dear viewers, between Trump's tariff threats last week and the NDP's call for contract cancellation this week, something extraordinary happened in Canadian defense relationships. Washington pushed too hard. Ottawa started saying no, and Sweden, patient and professional Sweden, became the partner Canadian officials started calling. This isn't just about one aircraft contract. This is about the fundamental question Mark Carney posed last month: will middle powers like Canada build independent capacity, or will they deepen dependency on unpredictable superpowers? Let me walk you through exactly what's happening, because the timeline tells you everything you need to know about how American weapons have become tools of political coercion. Last week, Donald Trump issued a threat that should alarm every Canadian watching this. He announced he would impose a 50% tariff on all Canadian-made aircraft sold to the United States, unless Canada certified several Gulfstream jets. Read his statement carefully, based on the fact that Canada has wrongfully, illegally, and steadfastly refused to certify the Gulfstream 500, 600, 700, and 800 jets. We are hereby decertifying their Bombardier Global Expresses and all aircraft made in Canada. Notice the language. Wrongfully, illegally, steadfastly refused. This wasn't diplomatic negotiation. This was economic punishment dressed as regulatory enforcement. But here's what Trump actually revealed. He showed every middle power watching that American defense contracts come with invisible strings attached. Buy our weapons, and we'll use them as leverage whenever our political demands aren't met. Refuse our terms on unrelated issues, and we'll threaten your airspace, your economy, your sovereignty. The pattern is unmistakable. Trump didn't just threaten Canadian aerospace exports. He connected defense relationships directly to regulatory compliance on completely separate commercial disputes. The message to Ottawa was crystal clear: American military equipment isn't just hardware, it's a control mechanism. And this is where Don Davies' statement becomes profoundly important. When the NDP called for canceling the F-35 contract, they weren't making a technical argument about aircraft performance. They were making a strategic argument about national autonomy. Davies explicitly cited Mark Carney's call for middle powers to build a new world order independent of superpower coercion. He saw the connection between Trump's tariff threats and Canada's defense procurement choices. Do you see what's happening? The F-35 debate just became a referendum on Carney's entire vision for Canada's future. Let's be specific about what Canada committed to. In 2022, Ottawa agreed to purchase 88 F-35A advanced fighter jets from Lockheed Martin, initially funding 16 deliverable aircraft. The projected cost, $19 billion Canadian. That's already substantial for a middle powers defense budget. But here's what wasn't in the public announcement when Ottawa signed that contract. Those aircraft come with 8 million lines of software code, and every single one of those lines is controlled by the United States Department of Defense, not Canada, not NATO, the Pentagon. The F-35 isn't just a fighter jet. It's a flying computer system that relies on something called mission data files, electronic battle manuals that tell the aircraft how to identify threats, plot flight paths to avoid detection, and engage modern air defense systems. Those files are managed by a 90-person team at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. not Ottawa, not anywhere in Canada, Florida. And here's where it gets even more revealing. Only one country has been granted an exemption from this dependency: Israel, which operates its F-35 Iadir variant with complete software autonomy. Canada, Germany, Italy, Poland, Netherlands, complete US software dependency. Translation: Canada would pay $27.7 billion for fighters it cannot fully operate without American permission during conflict, because that's exactly what the June 2025 audit from Canada's Auditor General revealed. The program cost has ballooned to $27.7 billion, a 46% increase in just 3 years. The manufacturing timeline delayed beyond initial projections. And the strategic implication: Canada would be locked into American supply chains, American maintenance requirements, American software updates controlled from Florida, and American political leverage for decades. Every single component of those aircraft ties Canada more tightly to Washington's priorities. Every maintenance contract, every software patch, every mission data file update that determines whether those jets can actually engage threats. This isn't defense independence. It's defense dependency with a $27.7 billion price tag that keeps growing. Now contrast that with what Sweden is offering through Saab. Earlier this month, it emerged that Canadian officials are exploring alternatives to the F-35. Saab made an offer that fundamentally changes the sovereignty equation: 72 Gripen fighter jets and 6 global eye surveillance aircraft manufactured directly in Canada, creating 12,600 jobs on Canadian soil. Think about what that means. Not just buying aircraft from Sweden, but building manufacturing capacity in Canada. Not just operating foreign technology, but developing domestic expertise. Not just creating dependency, but building industrial sovereignty. And here's the critical difference that changes everything: operational autonomy. The Gripen doesn't require American permission for software updates. It doesn't need mission data files managed from Florida. Canada would control its own aircraft, write its own mission parameters, update its own systems during conflict without waiting for Pentagon approval. When you're defending Canadian airspace in a crisis and Russian aircraft approach, do you want to be checking if Washington has approved your latest threat recognition software? Or do you want sovereignty? Minister of Industry Melanie Joly put it perfectly to CBC News: "We certainly can't control President Trump, but we can control our defense investments, who we award contracts to, and how we are ultimately able to create jobs in Canada." That sentence contains the entire strategic shift happening right now. Joly isn't saying Canada will defy America for the sake of defiance. She's saying Canada will prioritize Canadian interests regardless of American pressure. That's the middle power doctrine Carney outlined in action. Let's break down what the Gripen option actually represents, because this is where technical specifications meet sovereignty strategy. First, employment. 12,600 jobs in Canadian manufacturing spread across the entire aerospace package. 72 Gripen fighters and 6 global eye surveillance aircraft. That's not just economic benefit, it's strategic capacity building. Every Canadian worker who learns to manufacture advanced fighter jets is someone who can contribute to future defense innovation. Every factory that produces Gripen components is infrastructure that could adapt to other defense projects. This isn't buying weapons, it's building capability. Second, supply chain independence. Manufacturing in Canada means Canadian control over maintenance, upgrades, and operational readiness. No waiting for American approval to service aircraft. No vulnerability to sudden supply disruptions when Washington changes priorities. No leverage points for future presidents to exploit during political disputes. No 90-person team in Florida deciding whether Canadian jets can engage threats. Third, software sovereignty. This is where the difference becomes existential. The Gripen doesn't rely on mission data files controlled by a foreign military. Canada would write its own threat recognition parameters, update its own combat systems, operate independently during conflict without checking if the Pentagon has approved the latest software patch. When Russian aircraft approach Canadian airspace, Ottawa decides the response, not Washington, not Eglin Air Force Base, Ottawa. Fourth, middle power cooperation. Don Davey specifically noted that partnering with Sweden would mean two middle powers fulfilling Mr. Carney's stated goals. This is the new architecture Carney described countries of similar size and values building relationships that don't require superpower mediation. Ottawa and Stockholm can negotiate as equals. They can build frameworks that serve mutual interests without one partner using military hardware as political leverage. Fifth, technological sovereignty designed for middle power needs. The Gripen operates from shorter runways. It requires less extensive support infrastructure. It's built for countries that need capable defense without massive American-style military installations. Sweden designed it for Swedish sovereignty, and that design philosophy aligns perfectly with Canadian sovereignty requirements. If Canada wants to join the community of viewers who understand where geopolitical power is shifting, this is your moment. Hit subscribe, because we're tracking how middle powers are rewriting the rules while superpowers scramble to maintain old leverage. But here's the deeper pattern you need to recognize. Trump's threat about Canadian airspace and aircraft certification wasn't an isolated outburst. It's the latest example of a long-standing American strategy using defense relationships as coercion tools against allies. When Washington wants political compliance, it reminds partners that their security depends on American goodwill. And Canada isn't the only ally asking uncomfortable questions about that dependency. Wolfgang Ischinger, former head of the Munich Security Conference, told German media that if the United States were to restrict German F-35 operations the way it restricted Ukraine's use of F-16s, the issue of contract cancellation would be considered. Germany's contract, worth approximately $10 billion for 35 jets. Think about that for a moment. Germany, Europe's largest economy and industrial powerhouse, is publicly discussing the possibility of walking away from American fighters because of dependency concerns. The same concerns Don Davies is raising in Ottawa. The problem, that American leverage strategy is creating exactly the opposite effect Trump intends. Every time Washington threatens a middle power, it validates Carney's argument that middle powers need alternatives to superpower dependency. Every tariff threat tied to defense contracts proves Davies' point that American military integration deepens vulnerability. Every time Trump uses weapons as leverage, he makes the case for countries like Canada to build relationships with countries like Sweden instead. This is the fundamental transformation happening right now in global defense relationships. Middle powers are watching American behavior and asking themselves a simple question: do we want more integration with a superpower that treats allies as subordinates, or do we want partnerships with peers who respect our sovereignty? Canada is facing that question directly through the F-35 decision. If Ottawa proceeds with the full F-35 contract, despite Trump's threats and cost overruns, it signals acceptance of deeper American integration, regardless of how Washington treats Canadian interests. It means choosing familiarity over independence, even when that familiarity comes with growing costs and diminishing respect. But if Ottawa pivots to the Gripen option, it signals something entirely different. It means Canada is serious about Carney's middle power vision. It means Ottawa is willing to prioritize sovereignty over automatic alignment with Washington. It means Canadian defense policy will serve Canadian interests even when that creates friction with American expectations. The NDP's call for contract cancellation isn't just opposition politics. It's a test of whether Carney's rhetoric about middle power autonomy translates into actual policy changes. And Saab's offer to manufacture in Canada isn't just a business proposal. It's an alternative model for how middle powers can build defense capacity without accepting superpower domination. Watch what happens next, because this decision will reveal what kind of country Canada chooses to become: a middle power building independent capacity through peer partnerships, or a subordinate accepting deeper integration despite obvious costs. Trump threatened Canadian airspace. The NDP pushed for sovereignty. Sweden offered partnership. And Mark Carney's vision of middle power autonomy just became the framework for Canada's most important defense decision in a generation. The F-35 isn't just an aircraft. It's a choice between dependency and independence, between integration and sovereignty, between accepting American leverage or building Canadian capacity. And tonight, that choice is more urgent than ever.